Hey guys, this is Mr. Dykstra here, and we are getting ready for our lecture on modernism to go over Descartes and Kant. So I hope this is helpful. This is a philosophical introduction to modernism. We've been looking at some movements in philosophy, especially as they affect education, and we've been looking at pre-modernism through Plato, and now we're going to be looking at Descartes and Kant through modernism, and then eventually next week we'll be looking at postmodernism. But our pre-modern focus is, you notice that Plato would really say, look, there is such a thing as truth that is objective, but it is inside your soul, and once you can find that and remember it, you'll begin to conquer yourself, which will allow you to eventually conquer the world. Whereas modernism really says, nah, it's not so much in your soul as it is out in the world. It's discoverable, but you got to do it through science. Once you discover these things, then you can begin to rule the world outside of you, not just your body and other people, but the physical forces of nature. But eventually postmodernism is going to just kind of reject both of those outlays and just say, look, let's be honest, science is just one long history of one theory overthrowing the next. We're just playing word games. We might be actually understanding nature a little bit better, but we're just not actually doing what we think we're doing. And usually we just use it to hurt our neighbors anyway. So let's actually try to play the best version of this game we can. Today we're just focusing on modernism in the middle here, where we really turn our focus to the outside world, the physical world. Modernism philosophically is stepping away from the idea of citing sources like the Bible or the great classics from the Greeks or the Roman writers. So you'll see our two writers, Descartes and Kant, really not spending a lot of time citing or proof texting, but trying to establish their arguments through reason. And this rationality is going to help you, again, conquer the physical world outside of you, which is so hard to get a grasp on for the ancients. However, these guys are making so much progress between, let's say, the 16 and 1800s that they really have this massive sense of hope and optimism for the future, that the use of rationality and science really can make the world a better place. And this is also just a bloody period, as certain nations seem to be making huge leaps and others don't. People get sick of waiting around, and revolutions spark, and kings are overthrown, and democracies are set up in their place, and universities become more, I don't know if the phrase secular is helpful here, but literally universities begin to be reshaped. Our first poster child here is going to be a Frenchman named René Descartes, and he remains a Catholic a good portion of his adult life, all the way to the end. When he was young, he was a bit of a rabble-rouser, a gambler by his own estimates, but he joined the army and then stayed in there for quite a bit, but eventually just became able to live the quiet life and move around as an intellectual thinker, and just really enjoyed that life. But as a young child, he got deeply frustrated by how many different things he learned at school, and they very rarely ever seemed to come to the same conclusions. He wanted to clean all of this up, and he wanted to create a method that could help him do that. And he did just that. He created some rules for thinking, which he thought could be applied to anything. Now, he primarily tried to apply it to math and sciences, but he even tried to apply it a little bit to religion and philosophy with a little bit less success. But mostly, you're going to know that Descartes made some huge contributions to science, to math, and to philosophy. And so in the science field, I'm sure you learned some of this theory when you were a freshman in high school, but Descartes' methods can kind of be seen in this cycle here that really made a lot of progress over the last 400 years. There's some funny stories about Descartes, that he got cold in the year 1619 and kind of stepped into his stove and then began to just contemplate the truths of the universe, as he says. And as he does this, he made some great leaps forward, things that today we're still thankful for. But he also did this at the beginning of the 30-Year War. It's probably important to know that this was a really violent period in human history, especially European history. But this period brings forth these two great thinkers who are just surrounded by constant war and destruction. So it's kind of interesting that these guys isolate themselves in the middle of all this trouble and then come up with these great contributions. I think his greatest legacy that you might know him for is that he began to put together geometry and algebra, and he did it just simply this way. And he said he conceived of this early, way way back in the 1619s, even though he didn't publish this till 1637. But this right here has probably touched everyone's life. There's nobody that has not, probably in the Western world, been introduced to this kind of math. But again, those two systems, algebra and geometry, just lay as separate mathematical disciplines for literally millennia until he brought them together in a simple, elegant way. His contributions to philosophy are arguably less, but also very interesting because he would just start with these really simple foundational statements that really what gives me existence isn't God, but it's just that I'm a thinking person. And if you start with that, then you can move on. But if you can't establish you're even thinking, what good is there establishing anything else? You can doubt everything else. But the one thing you can't doubt is that you're actually thinking. I mean, even if you're dreaming, you can still establish that you're still thinking while dreaming. So Descartes wanted to start with himself and then move his way out. This, of course, was dangerous. Starting with yourself and not with God in his day put him on the Catholic Book of Index, which are basically forbidden books. And so universities couldn't use it to teach. And of course, then he got painted very quickly as an atheist, which he never admitted to his entire life. He always claimed to be a theist. He always attended Catholic Mass, and he hated the fact that people thought him an atheist. But still to this day, it's debated. He tried to make contributions in other fields, in physics and medicine. He mostly failed at both of those. I don't throw any slight his way. I just love that he was trying to use his method in almost every field of research possible. You'll read about it in chapter 5 of the methods for your assignment this week, but even here he tries to figure out how the heart was working. But I just love that he's using his method to try to discover new things. Our next poster child is Immanuel Kant. And Kant is going to be living in a tumultuous end of the Enlightenment. And as he does it, he actually earns a little bit of fame for himself by writing some pretty helpful ideas. And this one right here just echoes all over America, as you see that he tries to start painting a picture for how societies can move forward with public dialogue, without it always ending in judgment or trials or burnings or guillotines, but that if the governments would allow for a space for enlightenment, people could jump in, they could learn, they could participate, and through open dialogue we can discover so much about life. Kant just loved this idea of open dialogue, and the university became kind of the place where he loved to do it. He started university life at age 16, smart cookie, and they say he really never left. He basically just stayed there his whole life to the day he died, in the sense of like he never really traveled much outside of this university, maybe 20 miles max, but he just loved it. This is where he thought the great revolutions of the Enlightenment were going to take place. The universities would move history forward. He also had some religious beliefs that got him in a little bit of trouble. He did have some type of Protestant background. His father was religious quite a bit. He had some religious education as a child. But in the end, I think today we'd call him a liberal Protestant. He did believe in such things as God, the soul, maybe even freedom of the soul, meaning you could make choices. But he didn't think that science had any possibility of proving that. And so he basically tried to reverse the order and just said, look, everybody believes morals exist, and you never find a group of people without some type of morals. And if you have morals, then it's obviously you can be responsible, which means you have freedom. And if it's true that most courtrooms really are not going to catch most of the problems in this universe, there has to be something after you die that still continues to weigh out these choices, and that has to be God. That's a strange way for us to think about it, but he just thought that everybody somehow intuitively put these three together, and that's why we all continue to live morally. And some of us even have integrity. We're still good even when we're not caught or when people are not looking, because we really believe that these things are just part of reality. And so he kind of argued the backwards. We start with morals and then we make our way through this argument. And so that's kind of how he got there. Very similar to Descartes in the sense that it seems like he's reversing the religious path. Instead of starting with God, Descartes started with thinking. Kant starts with this moral responsibility. In the end, he really thought his philosophy would be as well known as Copernicus's revolution in physics. And if you ask philosophers, they usually will put Kant probably somewhere in their top 3 or 4 most famous. philosophers in all of human history, and he deserves it. The guy read everything, and he created all kinds of new ways of thinking about it, categories. There are whole dictionaries just dedicated to the amount of language this guy just created just to try to make sense of it. So as Copernicus kind of flips the world inside out, instead of the earth being the center, he puts the sun at the center. Kant tries to do the same philosophically. Instead of the world impressing itself upon us, Kant said that the mind is made to interpret. And really, the only thing we can study is how the mind interprets reality. I don't really know what I'm seeing. All I know is that I'm seeing it inside my head, and my head is organizing that material. So really what we can study is how the mind organizes material. And he thought that this would allow for science to continue, but also some humility on, let's say, larger questions like God or ethics or the soul, the things that most of Europe was embroiled in battles about, just bloody messes. So he was trying to bring those two worlds together of religion and science in maybe a little bit of a safer way. He did live between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and his real big goal was to help Prussia go through this revolution without a lot of violence, without this just huge amount of battles and death. He really thought that cooperation between nations and democracy really would make the world a better place, and that these two things did not need bloody revolutions. They could have intellectual revolutions. And that was kind of his hope. So you can feel these impulses all over America, and you can feel them in your classroom, right? And how you talk about religion, or how you think about voting, or just those are just assumed. But Kant fought a lot of those battles intellectually and left us a pretty strong legacy. All right, I hope this helps in your paper rating.